The Phantom Killer, the Texarkana Moonlight murders that terrified America. Before we dive in, kindly hit the subscribe button and let us know where you are watching from in the comment. The night was quiet. Too quiet for Texarkana. It was March 24th, 1946. Spring had just begun to thaw the red dirt roads of this small border town, split between Texas and Arkansas. Couples drove out to lovers' lanes after dark. Gravel backroads hidden by trees, the kind of places where no one was supposed to see you. That night, one of those couples, Jimmy Hollis, 25, and Mary Jean Larry, 19, parked just off Richmond Road. The radio was low, the windows fogged from their breath. They thought they were alone. Then they saw headlights. Car pulled up behind them and stopped. The engine cut off. The light vanished. And from the darkness, a man stepped out. He wasn't in uniform, but he looked like he could have been. A flashlight in one hand, a pistol in the other, and over his face, a white cloth sack crudely cut with 2 holes for eyes. Mary Jean froze. Jimmy squinted into the beam of light. The man's voice came low and calm. "Get out of the car." They hesitated. He stepped closer. I said, "Get out." Jimmy opened his door slowly, shielding Mary Jean. "This your car?" the man asked. "Yes, please. What's this about?" The stranger didn't answer. He raised the pistol, and without another word, he swung the barrel down, cracking it against Jimmy's skull. Jimmy fell. The man hit him again, and again. Blood pooled fast on the gravel. Mary screamed. "Don't scream," the man hissed. "If you do, I'll kill you." He dragged her from the car. The cloth mask shifted under his breath. His voice muffled, almost inhuman. "What do you want?" she cried. He didn't answer. He ordered her to run. When she hesitated, he said it again, louder this time. "Run." She bolted. Her bare feet pounded the dirt. Behind her, she could hear Jimmy groaning, the stranger's boots crunching closer. Then silence. The only thing louder than her heartbeat was the sound of her own breathing. She made it to a nearby house, hammering on the door. A man answered, stunned by the sight of her, face streaked with blood and tears. He called the police. When officers arrived, they found Jimmy still alive. Barely. His skull was fractured in 2 places. He would survive, but he couldn't describe his attacker. He'd only managed to see one thing clearly. "The mask," he whispered. It was white, like a pillowcase, with eyes cut out. Word of the attack spread fast. By morning, it was all anyone in Texarkana could talk about. But it wasn't just the brutality. It was the strangeness. A masked man, a secluded road. A couple attacked for no reason. People started locking their doors. Men cleaned their shotguns. Parents told teenagers to stay home after dark. The sheriff's office began patrols through the backroads. For a few weeks, the town tried to move on. Jimmy recovered. Mary Jean left town to stay with family, haunted by nightmares. But then, it happened again. April 14th, 1946. Just 3 weeks later. Another couple, Richard Griffin, 29, and Polly and Moore, 17, were found dead in their car. It was parked on a dirt road, not far from the last attack. A passing driver noticed something strange. The car doors were open, and there was no movement inside. When police arrived, they found Richard slumped against the seat, blood soaking his head and neck. Polly and was sprawled across him. Both had been shot in the back of the head. It was execution style. Clean, cold, deliberate. Shell casings near the car matched a .32 caliber pistol, the same type used in the earlier attack. And again, there were no witnesses, no fingerprints, no tire tracks, no leads. The only thing connecting the 2 crimes, the setting, Lover's Lane, nighttime, and a man no one could describe because no one had lived long enough to see his face. Texarkana was no longer a quiet border town. It was terrified. The press called the killer the Phantom. The name stuck. Headlines screamed, "Phantom slays 2 more. Masked madman stalks Lover's Lane." The local police worked alongside the Texas Rangers, led by a hard-edged lawman named Captain Manuel Lone Wolf Gonzalez. He was known for one thing: he didn't bluff. He told reporters, "I'll get him, and when I do, he won't need a mask anymore." But even Gonzalez couldn't calm the fear spreading through town. Hardware stores sold out of locks, guns, and window bars. Teenagers stopped going out at night. Movie theaters began closing early. People slept with loaded rifles beside their beds. And every time a dog barked, every time a car slowed near a field, hearts stopped, because they all thought the same thing: the Phantom is back. May 3rd, 1946. Just after midnight, a car was parked near Spring Lake Park. Inside were Paul Martin, 17, and Betty Jo Booker, 15. Betty Jo was a bright student, a talented saxophonist who had just finished playing at a dance that evening. Paul had picked her up afterward, like he always did. They were supposed to meet friends later that night, but they never showed. The next morning, Paul's body was found on the side of North Park Road. He'd been shot 4 times. Once through the nose, once in the ribs, once in the hand, and once in the back. 2 miles away, searchers found Betty Jo. She was half hidden under a tree, shot twice, once in the chest, once in the face. Her saxophone case was found about 100 yards away, still clasped shut. No fingerprints, no footprints, just the same kind of shell casings, the same gun. The Phantom had struck again. Now panic turned to hysteria. Newspapers stopped running ads for dances and movies. Instead, they ran headlines like, "Phantom Killer Strikes for 3rd Time. Is Texarkana safe?" For the first time, people began to think the unthinkable, that this might never stop. One headline summed it up best: "The town that dreads sundown." That line would later inspire a movie. But in 1946, it was real. Texarkana truly did dread sundown. Local police set up decoys, undercover officers posing as couples parked in cars. They waited hours in the dark, listening for footsteps, watching for headlights. Nothing. The Phantom was like smoke. He moved unseen, unheard, and every few weeks he killed again. On May 3rd, just hours after Paul and Betty Jo were found, hundreds of armed citizens formed neighborhood patrols. Farmers guarded the edges of town with shotguns. Every shadow looked like danger. Every noise sounded like death. Captain Gonzalez called it one of the most intense investigations in Texas history. More than 200 suspects were questioned. Every ex-con, every drifter, every jealous husband in a 50-mile radius. But nothing stuck. Each lead fizzled out. Each rumor led nowhere. Still, Gonzalez refused to stop. "I've hunted killers my whole life," he said, "but I've never hunted a ghost." Then came May 3rd, 1946. Another couple, Virgil and Katie Starks, were home in their farmhouse just outside Texarkana. Unlike the others, they weren't parked in a car. They weren't out late. They weren't doing anything risky. They were home, safe, or so they thought. Katie was sewing in the living room. Virgil sat in his chair reading the newspaper. The radio hummed softly. Then 2 gunshots. The window shattered. Virgil slumped forward, blood splattering across the floor. Katie screamed. She ran to the phone, dialing the police. Before she could speak, 2 more shots rang out. One hit her in the face. Another grazed her neck. She fell, bleeding, but somehow still conscious. Crawling on her hands and knees, she made it to the bedroom, leaving a trail of blood behind. She could hear the Phantom outside, circling the house, trying to get in. She grabbed a pistol from the nightstand. Texarkana had turned into a war zone. By May of 1946, fear had replaced trust. Neighbors watched each other with suspicion. Doors that had never known locks were now barricaded. The night belonged to the Phantom, and the police, they had no idea who he was. At the center of the investigation stood Captain Manuel Lone Wolf Gonzalez, a Texas Ranger known for his steel stare and sharper aim. He had a reputation for taking down outlaws across the state. But this was different. He wasn't hunting a man. He was hunting a shadow. "Texarkana is a small place," he told the press. "A killer can't hide here forever. He's one of us. He walks these streets. That single quote ignited panic. Because if the phantom really was one of them, anyone could be the killer. The investigation began with chaos. Hundreds of tips flooded in. Most were useless. Some were hysterical. But buried in the noise were patterns. A few men who stood out. The first was a taxi driver who lived near one of the crime scenes. He'd been seen driving late at night on the same backroads where the couples were attacked. Police brought him in. He was calm. Too calm. He denied everything. But when they searched his car, they found a .32 caliber pistol. It wasn't the same gun used in the murders, but it was close enough to rattle nerves. He was released for lack of evidence. The second suspect was a farmer whose land bordered Spring Lake Park. He told police he'd seen a strange man walking near his property on the night of the Booker Martin murders. But when pressed for details, his story kept changing. Some said he was protecting someone. Others whispered he might have been protecting himself. Still, no proof. No arrest. Every night, patrol cars roamed the backroads with their headlights off. Officers waited in silence, baiting the killer with fake lovers' lanes. Young deputies volunteered to act as decoys, parking with mannequins dressed as women, pretending to be teenage couples. They sat for hours, guns ready, waiting for the phantom to make a move. But he never showed. The frustration grew thick. Reporters crowded the police stations daily, demanding answers. Citizens carried pistols to church. Mothers slept in their children's rooms with shotguns propped beside the bed. The town was losing its mind. The FBI joined the case after the Starks attack. Ballistics experts compared bullets from every crime scene. Each came from the same weapon, a .32 caliber automatic pistol, possibly a Colt. But beyond that, there was nothing. No fingerprints, no hair, no tire tracks, not even a cigarette but left behind. The phantom was meticulous. He didn't kill for money. He didn't leave messages or take trophies. He appeared, struck, and disappeared. Always on a weekend. Always near midnight. Theories began to swirl. Some said he was a veteran, fresh from the war, still addicted to killing. Others thought he was a local, someone who knew those roads too well to be caught. A few whispered something darker, that maybe the phantom wasn't one man at all. Fear breeds imitation. In the months that followed, dozens of pranksters put on pillowcase masks and jumped out at passing cars. Some were teenagers trying to scare their friends. Others were sick opportunists reveling in the chaos. One man was shot dead when a nervous farmer mistook him for the real phantom. The sheriff made a statement that echoed across the state. Anyone caught pretending to be the phantom will be considered armed and dangerous. No one laughed after that. On May 8, 1946, a strange woman walked into the police station. Her name was Peggy Swinney. She was 21, nervous, and trembling. She said she wanted to talk about her husband, Yowell Lee Swinney, a 29-year-old car thief and petty criminal. At first, she refused to say much. But after hours of questioning, she whispered something that froze investigators cold. "My husband. He's the one you're looking for." The detectives leaned in. "What do you mean?" She stared down at her hands. "The one with the mask," she said softly. "The one who's been killing those people." They called in Captain Gonzalez immediately. He sat across from her, calm but sharp. "Tell me everything," he said. Peggy described nights when Yowell would disappear for hours. When he came home, he'd be sweaty, nervous, and smelled of gunpowder. She said he had hidden a pistol in their car. And worse, that he talked about the murders before they were even in the papers. She described details only the killer would know. How the victims were positioned, the types of wounds, the way the phantom moved. It was the confession investigators had been praying for. Yowell Swinney was arrested in late June for stealing a car in Texarkana. When the police caught him, he reportedly shouted, "Please don't shoot me." No one had mentioned shooting him. They hadn't even told him what he was being arrested for. His behavior immediately raised suspicions. At the station, he refused to talk. He demanded a lawyer, cursed at reporters, and laughed when they mentioned the phantom. But when Captain Gonzalez told him, "Your wife's been talking," his smile vanished. He slammed his fists on the table and shouted, "You got nothing on me." Still, they did. Peggy's statements were detailed and chilling. She said her husband confessed to killing 5 people, that he wore a mask made from a white sack, that he chose victims who were easy targets, that he had said, word for word, "They'll never catch me. They'll never know it was me." There was just one issue. Texas law at the time forbade a wife from testifying against her husband. No matter what Peggy said, none of it could be used in court. It was as if she'd never spoken. Prosecutors had no physical evidence linking Yowell to the murders. No fingerprints, no gun, no witnesses. They charged him only with car theft. He was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. But not for murder, not for being the Phantom. Years later, when journalists interviewed Peggy, her story had changed. She now claimed she'd been pressured into naming her husband, that she'd been scared, that police had twisted her words. When asked directly if Yowell was the Phantom, she hesitated, then said, "No, he wasn't. I made it up." But investigators who had been there didn't believe her. Captain Gonzalez was convinced. So was Sheriff Bill Presley. They believed Yowell Swinney was the Phantom. But without proof, the case could never be closed. The white mask became an obsession. Police searched every dry goods store in town, looking for pillowcases or sacks with holes cut out. None matched the survivors' descriptions exactly, but the detail haunted everyone who'd survived him. Mary Jean Larry, the girl from the first attack, later told reporters that the voice behind the mask wasn't human. It was calm, cold. Like he'd done this before, she said. Like killing wasn't new to him. She never forgot those words. Run. They echoed in her dreams for years. The Phantom never left a calling card. He didn't write letters like the Zodiac or taunt police like Son of Sam. He didn't seem to care if anyone knew who he was. What he wanted was fear. Each attack followed a rhythm, weeks of silence. Then a killing. Then silence again. He seemed to enjoy watching the town twist itself into madness. The local papers described it perfectly. He kills when he wants, and when he's finished, he watches us tremble. At one point, police investigated a university professor who fit the Phantom's general description. He was tall, quiet, and owned a .32 caliber pistol. For more chilling true crime stories, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. The murders had stopped, but Texarkana didn't sleep. Not for a long, long time. When dawn broke over the city in the summer of 1946, it should have been a new beginning. But instead, it felt like a warning. The people had survived the killings, yet their lives had been carved open by fear. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. No new bodies were found. No masked man lurking in the woods. The police still patrolled every dirt road, but their lights grew dimmer with each passing night. They were watching for a ghost that never came back. For most towns, the absence of violence would have meant relief. But for Texarkana, silence was worse, because silence meant he could still be out there. Stores closed before sunset. Restaurants stopped serving dinner after dark. The streets that once buzzed with laughter and jukebox music now sat empty. By 9 p.m., the only sounds were crickets, and the occasional bark of a dog that made hearts race across entire neighborhoods. A headline in the Texarkana Gazette captured it perfectly. "The town dreads the dark." Local churches held nightly prayer vigils. Theaters stopped showing late-night movies. Gas stations refused to fill up cars after dusk. Even weddings were postponed, because nobody wanted to drive after nightfall. And the people who once went out parking on lonely back roads, they never did again. That image, the man with the white sack over his head, became burned into the town's soul. It was too simple, too easy to replicate. A white pillowcase, 2 eye holes. That's all it took to bring the fear rushing back. Every Halloween for decades, police braced for pranksters who wanted to dress like the Phantom. Each time someone tried it. Each time someone nearly got shot. The legend had outlived the crimes. The ones who lived carried the weight differently. Mary Jean Larry, the girl from the first attack, moved away from Texarkana soon after. She never liked to talk about that night, but in a rare interview, years later, she said something that sent chills through everyone who heard it. He wasn't just trying to kill us. He wanted us to feel it. He wanted to hear us scream. Her boyfriend, Jimmy Hollis, recovered physically, but never fully mentally. He developed severe anxiety, always looking over his shoulder. He couldn't handle crowds, couldn't drive alone at night. The fear stayed with him until the day he died. Virgil and Katie Stark's family never recovered either. Their farmhouse was torn down in the 1950s. People said it was haunted. They claimed to hear footsteps and whispers from inside, even though the house was empty. The Starks' relatives later said something eerie. It wasn't just the murder, it was the message. He could come right into your home. No one was safe anymore. Texarkana became obsessed with the phantom. He was everywhere, on the front page of newspapers, whispered in barbershops, painted into local folklore. Every so often, someone claimed to have seen him. A man walking down a dirt road, a car parked too long in a field, a figure standing under a streetlight at midnight. Each report turned into panic. Police rushed to the scene. Nothing, but each scare reignited the fear. It was as if the phantom had discovered something more powerful than murder. Terror itself. By the 1950s, the story of the Phantom Killer had spread beyond Texas and Arkansas. Magazines wrote about it. Radio hosts dramatized it. True crime authors began calling it the Moonlight Murders. The nickname stuck. In 1976, a movie called The Town That Dreaded Sundown was released. It was part documentary, part horror film, filmed right in Texarkana. Locals watched in stunned silence as their real nightmares replayed on the big screen. The film became infamous because of what happened next. On opening night, the drive-in theater showing the movie filled with hundreds of cars. Couples, families, reporters. It was supposed to be a moment of closure, a way to face the past. Halfway through the movie, the unthinkable happened. A man wearing a white mask walked between the cars, slowly, deliberately, staring into windshields. People screamed. Engines roared to life. The crowd panicked. Police rushed in. But by the time they got there, he was gone. Was it a prank? Or something else? No one ever found out. That wasn't the only time the Phantom's ghost returned. In the late 1980s, Texarkana police began receiving anonymous letters on the anniversary of the Starks murders. Each one had the same line, written in block letters. "I'm still here." Investigators traced the handwriting, the paper, even the ink. No match. Then, in 1993, exactly 47 years after the first attack, 2 teenagers were found dead in a car near the same road where the Phantom's first victims had been discovered. They had both been shot. The crime scene looked eerily familiar. Too familiar. The town's newspapers exploded with headlines. "Has the Phantom returned?" Police ruled it a robbery gone wrong. But the similarities were impossible to ignore. The angle of the shots, the tire tracks, the way the victims were positioned. For a week, panic returned to Texarkana like it had never left. And then, as always, it disappeared again. Over the years, dozens of theories tried to answer one question. Who was the Phantom Killer? Some still believed it was Yowell Swinney, the car thief whose wife accused him of murder. Others were certain it was a returning war veteran, haunted by what he'd seen overseas. A few more believed something darker, that the Phantom was a police officer, someone with the knowledge of patrol routes and response times, someone who could blend in even as searchlights swept across the fields. One old theory, buried deep in FBI notes, even suggested the Phantom might have worked at a nearby funeral home. He would have had access to bodies, to silence, to death itself. No theory ever stuck. No proof ever surfaced. Just whispers. By the 1990s, the city of Texarkana began something strange. They started showing The Town That Dreaded Sundown every year as part of an outdoor film festival. Hundreds gathered at Spring Lake Park, the site where some of the victims had been found. Blankets spread out. Projectors hummed. Families watched as actors reenacted the horrors of 1946. It became an annual ritual. Some called it the town's way of taking the power back. Others said it was a haunting disguised as entertainment. Even now, decades later, that tradition continues. And every time the movie plays, a chill runs through the crowd when the masked killer appears on screen, because everyone knows he was real. The Phantom Killer changed Texarkana forever. He changed how people lived, how they trusted, how they looked at strangers. Parents told their children, "Don't go out after dark. The Phantom might get you." For some, it became folklore. For others, it was history carved into their bones. Even now, if you drive those same back roads near Spring Lake Park at night, the air feels heavy. Locals say you can feel it, that tension, that weight, that presence. Some claim to have seen headlights flicker in the woods or heard faint footsteps along the roadside. They say if you turn around too fast, you'll see nothing. But if you don't turn around at all, you'll hear him breathe. In the police archives, the Texarkana Moonlight murders file still exists. Dust-covered, incomplete, stamped with one haunting word: unsolved. Over 1,000 interviews, hundreds of suspects, dozens of false confessions, and yet no name. Every few years, a new detective takes a look, hoping for something they missed. The people of Texarkana were no longer sleeping. By April 1946, the town that once hummed with jukeboxes and church bells had gone silent. Doors were locked, windows nailed shut. Parents whispered to their children not to look out after dark. No one went out on Lover's Lane anymore, because the Phantom Killer was still out there, and he was hunting. In the weeks following the second double murder, the streets of Texarkana emptied by nightfall. Businesses closed early. Theaters offered matinee-only showings. Gas stations stopped pumping fuel after 7 p.m. The fear was contagious. Reporters from Life magazine, the Dallas Morning News, and even Time flooded the small border town. Photographers snapped eerie shots of empty roads, abandoned cars, and police patrolling in pairs with rifles in hand. Texarkana had become a city under siege. Sheriff W.H. Bill Presley, no relation to Elvis, was overwhelmed. His office received hundreds of calls every night. Some claimed to see shadows moving across their lawns. Others swore they heard footsteps outside their bedroom windows. And some said they'd spotted the Phantom himself. A tall man with a white sack mask, his eyes cut out, his breathing heavy and slow. Each call ended the same way. Officers would rush to the address, only to find nothing. No footprints, no fingerprints, no Phantom, just fear. Then came May 3rd, 1946. It was a warm spring night, the kind that usually brought couples outside to sit under the stars. But in Texarkana, romance was now a death wish. Virgil and Katie Starks were different. They didn't live near the Lover's Lane, where the previous attacks had taken place. Their home was 10 miles northeast of town, isolated farmland surrounded by open fields. They thought they were safe. At 9 p.m., Katie sat in her bedroom, wearing her robe and reading a magazine. Virgil sat comfortably in an armchair in the living room, listening to the radio. It was just another quiet Texas night, until a single gunshot shattered the calm. The bullet tore through the window and struck Virgil in the back of the head. Katie jumped to her feet, startled by the glass exploding behind her. She ran into the living room and saw her husband slump over, blood running down the back of his neck. She screamed. Another shot ripped through the air, hitting Virgil again, this time in the face. He collapsed instantly. Katie froze. Then instinct took over. She ran to the phone to call the police. As she picked up the receiver, a third shot blasted through the window. The bullet struck her right cheek, shattering her teeth and exiting behind her ear. But she didn't fall. Somehow, through shock and adrenaline, she stayed on her feet. She ran for the front door. Another bullet followed, grazing her head and tearing off part of her hair. Blood poured down her neck. Her vision blurred. The walls spun. Still, she kept moving. She stumbled out onto the porch, down the steps, and across the field. Barefoot, bleeding, disoriented, but alive. She made it to her sister's house nearly 100 yards away. Her face was unrecognizable. When she finally collapsed on the porch, she gasped a single sentence through broken teeth. "Virgil's dead. The Phantom got us." When police arrived at the Starks' home, they found 2 bullet holes in the window and blood splattered across the living room floor. Virgil was slumped in his chair, his pipe still smoldering beside him. There were muddy footprints outside the window, size 10.5 men's. The killer had used a .22 caliber rifle, different from the .32 pistol used in the earlier murders. But it was too similar to ignore. Same pattern, same isolation, same execution. The phantom killer had struck again. News spread faster than ever. The headline screamed, "Phantom strikes again. Farmer slain, wife shot in head." That night, panic became hysteria. Every gun store in Texarkana sold out of ammunition. Hardware stores ran out of locks and deadbolts. Men patrolled their homes with shotguns. Women slept in bathtubs, believing the cast iron might stop bullets. Some people fled the town entirely. Others set traps and wired their yards with alarms made from tin cans. Texarkana was unraveling, and the police still had no suspect. Rangers and FBI agents swarmed the city. Captain Manuel "Lone Wolf" Gonzalez, one of Texas's most famous lawmen, arrived to take charge. He was tall, sharp-eyed, and dressed like a movie cowboy. Tan suit, polished boots, pearl-handled revolvers. When reporters asked him what he planned to do, he famously replied, "I'm not going to let this man make a fool of the Rangers. We'll find him, dead or alive." But the phantom had vanished. For weeks, they interrogated anyone who owned a .22 rifle. They questioned drifters, ex-cons, jealous husbands, and loners who lived in the woods. Hundreds of leads. No arrest. The investigation stalled again. Then rumors began to swirl. Some said the killer was a soldier stationed at the nearby Red River Army Depot. Others believed he was a local, someone who knew exactly when and where to strike. A few whispered that the phantom had already left Texarkana, blending back into normal life, maybe even watching the panic he'd caused from afar. As June turned to July, the killings stopped. Just stopped. No more midnight gunfire. No more blood-soaked fields. But the fear didn't fade. Even years later, residents locked their doors every night. Parents warned their kids about parking on dark back roads. The story became a ghost that never left, passed down through generations as both a warning and a mystery. The town couldn't heal because there was no closure, no arrest, no confession, no trial, only a trail of blood and a mask in the dark. Katie Stark survived her wounds but lived with scars, physical and emotional. She never moved back into that house. She rarely spoke of that night again. Every year after, when reporters asked for interviews, she refused. Her silence said everything. The phantom had taken more than lives. He had taken peace. And even in his absence, his shadow still stretched across Texarkana. By autumn of 1946, the national headlines had faded. The reporters packed up. The Rangers moved on. But the legend didn't die. People said that on quiet nights, you could still hear gunshots echoing from the fields outside town. Some claimed to see a figure standing under the streetlights, just watching. Others swore that if you parked out near Lover's Lane after midnight, you could hear footsteps in the gravel and feel the chill of someone breathing behind you. The phantom killer had become more than a man. He was a ghost story now, a myth that lived in whispers, a nightmare that refused to end, a killer who vanished without a trace, a town that never forgot, and a mystery that remains unsolved. The people of Texarkana had survived the terror, but the question that haunted them and America remained: who was the phantom killer? And if he was still alive, was he ever truly gone? Texarkana never truly moved on. Even decades later, the town's nights still carried a quiet unease. When the wind blew across the fields, it was easy to imagine the crunch of footsteps on gravel, the slow breath behind the mask. The phantom killer had disappeared, but he had never been forgotten. And the question that haunted everyone remained: who was he? After the Starks attack, police had their first real suspect. A man named Yowell Lee Swinney. He was 29 years old. Car thief, petty criminal, a drifter who'd been in and out of trouble since his teens. He was the kind of man who could blend in, quiet, forgettable, and always on the move. But one thing made investigators' hearts race: his wife. On July 23, 1946, officers in Arkansas caught Swinney stealing a car. He was arrested without much struggle. But his wife, Peggy, was hysterical. At the station, she began rambling, crying, shaking, saying things that made little sense, until she said something that made the room go still. She told officers that her husband was the one who killed those people in Texarkana. They leaned in. "What did you say?" She repeated it. "He killed them. I was there." Detectives couldn't believe what they were hearing. Peggy Swinney described details that hadn't been made public. The gunshots, the broken glass, the way one victim's body had been left near the road. She even mentioned the kind of car they'd driven that night, one that matched a witness report from the second double murder. It all fit. She said he came home with blood on his clothes. She said he'd laughed about those kids on the road. She said he threatened to kill her if she ever told anyone. It sounded like a confession. But there was one problem. Under Arkansas law at the time, a spouse could not testify against their husband. Peggy's statement was inadmissible in court. Without her, they had nothing but circumstantial evidence. Stolen cars, erratic behavior, and a bad reputation. No weapon, no fingerprints, no eyewitness, no case. Still, Captain Gonzalez believed he had his man. He told reporters, "I believe Swinney is the Phantom, but I'll never be able to prove it in court." Swinney was convicted, but not of murder. Instead, he went to prison for auto theft, a lesser crime, but when the sentence came down, the judge made it count. Life in prison. The town breathed a small sigh of relief, because after Swinney was locked up, the killings stopped. For years, police and locals alike believed they had quietly solved the mystery, but doubt lingered like smoke. Some officers insisted the evidence was too thin. Others believed Peggy's story had been coached or exaggerated. And then there were the people who swore they saw the Phantom years later, far from Texarkana. In 1973, nearly 3 decades after the murders, Texas Monthly revisited the case. The article reignited the fire. It claimed that no definitive proof had ever linked Swinney to the crimes. It also noted that Peggy had changed parts of her story over time. So maybe the Phantom hadn't been caught after all. Maybe he had simply walked away, vanished, and started over somewhere else. A quiet man with a dark secret buried deep inside. Then came 1976. 30 years after the first murder, the town decided to confront its ghosts. Filmmakers came to Texarkana to shoot a movie based on the killings, the town that dreaded sundown. It blurred the line between fact and fiction, showing a masked man in a sack terrorizing young couples, shot against the very roads where it had all happened. The film brought tourists, and it brought controversy. Some families of the victims were furious, saying the movie exploited their pain. Others believed it helped the town face what had long been unspeakable. But something strange happened after the film premiered. Reports of phantom sightings spiked again. People claimed they saw a man in a white mask near Spring Lake Park, the very place where the movie had screened. One woman swore someone followed her home from the drive-in. Was it paranoia? Or had the legend reawakened something darker? The Phantom had become more than just a killer. He was an idea, a symbol of the unknown evil that could hide in any town, any face. Parents used his story to scare teenagers into coming home early. Police officers used it to remind rookies how fragile peace could be. And for true crime lovers, the Texarkana Moonlight murders became one of America's most haunting mysteries. A case with no closure, no face, no justice. But what if Swinney really was the killer? Let's look at what we know. He was in the area. He matched the rough physical description. His car matched one scene near 2 murder scenes. And his wife confessed before recanting. Even after he was sent to prison, people close to the case said he bragged about being the one they could never catch. And yet, others swore he was incapable of such violence. He never killed again after his release. He died in 1994, an old man, his secrets buried with him. Still, detectives kept looking. In the 1990s, Texas Rangers reopened the files. They searched for DNA. They examined shell casings and crime scene photos with new technology. Nothing. The evidence was too old, too contaminated. The phantom had left no trace behind. He had lived up to his name. So what was he, really? A lone serial killer? A jealous husband? A soldier back from war, broken by what he'd seen? Or something darker, something that couldn't be explained by logic alone? The truth was that the phantom became a reflection of every fear Texarkana had buried deep down. Fear of isolation, fear of the dark, fear that evil could be anyone, even the man next door. Every year, Texarkana still holds a public screening of The Town That Dreaded Sundown. It's played right in Spring Lake Park, where one of the earliest murders occurred. People bring blankets, popcorn, and flashlights. They laugh nervously when the masked killer appears on screen. But there's always a moment, right after the movie ends, when everyone turns, just for a second, to glance behind them. Because deep down, no one's ever sure. Maybe the phantom was caught. Maybe he wasn't. Maybe he's still out there, older now, watching from the shadows, smiling at how his legend lives on. The phantom killer, the man who vanished into the night, the ghost who silenced a town, the mystery that refused to die. He left behind no fingerprints, no identity, and no peace. Only fear, only questions, only the sound of footsteps in the dark. And that's the terrifying truth about Texarkana. A place that learned, one bloody spring, that monsters don't always hide under the bed. Sometimes, they walk among us. For more chilling true crime stories, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel.